Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover podcast presented by the Field of 68. As you can see, for the first time since mid-December, I believe, the four of us are together, and hopefully, much like the Alabama basketball team, maybe it's a sign that Alabama's getting to full strength when we're all back together. But I'm your host, Christian Sykes, joined as always by Charles Branch, Michael Harper, and Joey Blackwell. Fellas, how have you doing? It's like I said, it's been a minute since we've all four been together.
Think it's kind of crazy. We're over halfway through this season now. I think this is what the second, maybe third time all four of us have been on here at once. But we got a lot to talk about today, so I'm not going to take up too much more time talking about it.
We did tell you guys that we would all be back, that nobody was redshirting this year. So we're all back. Here's proof. We're all back and ready to roll.
Despite us all wearing red
But
shirts.
I was about to say, besides the fact that we're all wearing
We're
crimson
all wearing
stuff.
red shirts. Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, ready to get into it because as soon as this is over, I gotta head to the grocery store and buy up all the milk and bread. So if you're missing any, give me a call as we get ready for this new, I don't know if you want to call it snowmageddon, whatever trendy word we've used in the past for these snow and ice storms that have come to Alabama. So a lot to talk about and then a lot to prepare for both on the court and off the court. And I maybe
Well,
not just court, but courts in plural.
well, you could say there's a Canadian storm brewing in Tuscaloosa, both literally and figuratively, with some stuff that's going on in the courts, as Charles said. But before we do that, we want to briefly touch on the Oklahoma and the Mississippi State games. I'm gonna let the guys give their thoughts on the game because I found out that I'm not allowed to watch basketball games anymore. Because every time I have, Alabama's gotten a double digit lead or double digit deficit, and I turn it off, and then they come back and win. So, Michael, Charles, Joey, you guys decide who goes first. Just give your thoughts on the two games last week. And unfortunately, we didn't do a space. One, because the midweek game it didn't end until midnight, and then two, um, I had to go do family things on Saturday and did not get an opportunity to watch the game. But as I mentioned, because I'm banned from watching games, so you guys decide who wants to give the breakdown first.
Joe, you tip it off.
Okay, the Mississippi State game, tremendous effort in that game. Down by, I think they were down 14 with around 7.5 minutes left. I do have this, how much we scored. I think let's see, it was 23-5, outscored them those final 7 minutes to take a 2-point lead heading into half, and really just, we've seen this team close out halves really well, but usually when they do that, they come out lackluster to start the second half. Alabama was able to keep their foot on the gas. They ended up beating Mississippi State by 15. That is definitely thanks to Philon, who had one of his best games of the year, at least on the offensive end. He had 32 points. Sherrell, also one of, if not his best performance of the year. He had 22 points as well as 5 rebounds. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about Amari Allen having a big party himself with a double-double with 13 points and 13 rebounds. Overall, I like the look of the team. I'll go ahead and move to Oklahoma as well before we get their thoughts. Whatever good came out of the Mississippi State game was quickly forgotten. As Alabama really struggled. It just seemingly, I remember talking to my wife during the game, we were incapable of building up a lead greater than 4 points. Anytime we would have a score to go up, we would just let them right back into it, even to the final minute of play, final 10 seconds of play that lasted about 45 minutes. Just Philon once again had a good game. Sherrell also had a good game. So we're seeing a lot from both of them, but we need to see more from other players. Allen also had 12. Millette had a good game with 12. We need to see more. I don't want to say effort. We just need to see better performances all around. I think this team, when they have, it's kind of a catch-22 in that when they have close games, they play really hard, but they're incapable of taking advantage of opportunities. But then when they also have big leads, they give those up too. They get complacent. So maybe a certain Canadian that's coming can fire them up a little bit. I hope it doesn't. I hope we don't need that in order to make it happen. Um, but I really need to see more cohesion among this team, and I need to see more. I'm trying to think of the word. I'm blanking on it, um, but yeah, a very, very impressive game against Mississippi State, followed by a tough game at Oklahoma. But fortunately, back at home, and so hopefully that'll help remedy some things as well. How about you guys?
I think the biggest thing right now for this team and what's going to really help this team throughout the season is the emergence of Aiden Sherrill. We all talked preseason, can Aiden Sherrill make the leap, make that next step? And we're not seeing him make the next step. We're seeing him make the step after the next step, right? Having 22 points, the other night, 22 points, only 5 rebounds. But Amari Allen was busy scooping up all the rebounds Wednesday night. But he is becoming a complete player around the rim. His before he or last season, we saw him not struggle around the rim, but we saw him go up soft a lot of times. We saw him fall away. He wouldn't necessarily finish with any kind of authority. There are times I still would like to see him throw the ball down instead of laying it up off the glass, but he's figured out the touch around the rim. He's figured out how to use his body. He's figured out when to delay, to get the shot blocker going up. It's really impressive how much work he's done around the rim. And I said this to somebody the other day, and there's a reason for it because of who is working with him on a day-to-day basis. I know it's not back to the basket post-ups, but you can still see some Erwin Dudley in his finishes around the rim. And I really think that he's been putting in a lot of work with Erwin Dudley. And it's actually really impressive, the jump he's making to be able to do what he's doing on the inside and then to be able to step back, behind the 3-point line and knock down threes. It's exactly the type of big that Nate Oates wants in his system. And if he can just continue this, and then, if some other pieces come together that we may talk about, that we're going to talk about later, if some other pieces come together, this could be a really dangerous team as long as we continue to not turn the ball over, continue to give a little more effort on the glass, and then continue to look like we did the last 2 games coming out of the second half. I talked about the Mississippi State game, recapping Oklahoma. It was a 13-0 run, just like that, coming out of the second half. And that's back-to-back games now where Alabama's come out in the second half and really turned up the defensive pressure, 2, relentlessly attacked the rim and got the ball into the paint before the ball got spread, and really, dug in their heels and, moved defensively and communicated on defense. So whatever Oates has done the last 2 halftimes, I hope he continues to do that. And maybe we continue seeing this team build on 2 road wins. I know the Oklahoma game was ugly. That happens in SEC play. It happens in Big Ten play. It happens in ACC play. It happens on the road in college basketball, no matter who you're playing. So hopefully we can continue to make that next step. But I'm just overly impressed with the jump that Aiden Sherrill has made. And that's not even adding the last 2 games that LeBaron Fallon has played.
I thought this week was one of the more impressive weeks as far as SEC weeks in Alabama's history. And I know it doesn't jump out as far as that you're going on the road and playing two teams, and they're both nationally ranked. It's Mississippi State and Oklahoma, who, as we've gotten into conference play, they're both struggling. And we said on our last podcast that we expected Alabama to go 2-0 during the week. That was before knowing that Taylor Bowen was going to be out and Keaton Bristow was going to be out and that Latrell Wrightsell was going to be out. We knew Latrell's been banged up, but thought there might be a chance that he was going to come back for those games. So as I'm sitting there watching the first half of that Mississippi State game and we're down 14 points and State's really taking it to us, I'm sitting there probably making more excuses than I should of just what the team's having to go through. That you've basically got 8 scholarship players going into this game with the type of pace that we play as well. And knowing that Taylor Bowen had hurt his hand in practice the day before, and to show that quality, to show that pride, that toughness, to not only come back in the game, but to come back to where you had a lead at the end of the first half was shocking to me and very impressive. And then you go on and end up winning the game by 15. Josh Hubbard, I think, went for 23 in the game, but 23 for Josh Hubbard is a normal night for him. It was impressive that you didn't let anybody else really go off in Starkville. So you finish that game and you go to Oklahoma and you get Taylor Bowen back, but he was obviously playing with a pad on his hand. Early start, and the start was sloppy. I think a lot of frustration obviously came in towards the end of the first half with how Oklahoma finished the half. But then, like y'all said, come out, start the second half, go on a 13-0 run, and it becomes a back and forth game. Didn't shoot free throws well. This has been a team that I do believe has shot free throws well throughout the year, but there have been key moments at the end of games where this team has not shot free throws well. And that's something that, Michael, you may be able to speak a little bit more to it. You can shoot as many free throws as you want in practice. And there's probably a confidence that does come from that when you step to the line in a late game situation that you're going to make it. But the pressure moments as far as going to the free throw line, we have not excelled in that this year in these tight games. But to come out and get 2 wins and to keep your SEC regular season championship hopes alive, basically, because if you had dropped both of these or dropped one, they really would have taken a hit.
Yeah, I think for Alabama, the Mississippi State win was probably one of their more impressive wins for the season, just because of the circumstances. Um, to come back and win by 15 after being down 14, and realistically, Alabama was up by 20 for a large part of that second half in Mississippi State because I turned the game back on with 6 minutes to go, and I'm not even joking. Alabama went -7 when I turned the game back on, and then I turned it back off. But um, for a large part of that second half, Alabama was up 20 points, and to be able to do that with only 8 players, and um, as we all know, Alabama has been struggling at times with foul trouble. The fact that you were able to get through that game without that much foul trouble, and come away with a convincing win. On the flip side, I think you lost all of the goodwill and grace that you had accumulated in the Mississippi State game, in the Oklahoma game. Um, I know Taylor Bowen played and he was injured, and I get that it was just an off shooting night for Alabama. And Alabama and Nate Oates teams have typically struggled in Norman, um, but you know Oklahoma, I'm going to be quite frank, is a terrible basketball team, um, and Alabama shouldn't be in dogfights with them like they were, and you shouldn't be getting down 11. I will say the second half starts are encouraging. I don't know what happened to our first half starts, because our first half starts were amazing and then second half starts were terrible. And now it looks like our second half starts are great and our first half starts are terrible. So we just need to figure out how we can put everything together. And much like this podcast where it's been piecemealed for the last 2 months, hopefully the fact that we're all together, um, is a good sign for Alabama. But that's just kind of my quick thoughts on the games. I think a lot of people that are here are probably interested, more importantly, with the news that kind of came out today, um, with the Canadian hope, Charles Bediako potentially coming back to Alabama. Um, Before we get into our thoughts, I kind of just want to give a as unbiased as possible kind of breakdown of timeline of events, reason why we're here, and maybe what's potentially next for Alabama. Um, so, I mean, this is kind of all started with I mean, even before the whole Baylor situation with James Najee, like the NCAA has been kind of going towards this direction of having issues with professional basketball players or professional players from previous, other sports coming into college athletics because of antitrust lawsuits. It's hard to deny someone an opportunity to go get a college education, right? Like it's hard to prove in a court of law. It's hard to say, oh, well, this person can't be or it can't have any earning potential. Like it's hard to prove all of this, which is why where we're at with NIL. But when you go and look at it, Alabama wasn't really looking into bringing back Charles Bediako until the James Najee situation came out, and he was ruled eligible, and got 4 years of eligibility despite being the 31st pick in the draft. He didn't sign a NBA contract. He was more of like a draft and stash guy that only played in Europe. I think he played a little bit of summer league, but basically was a draft and stash guy. So essentially, he was a European professional basketball player. And as we saw this summer with teams like Illinois, with teams Auburn has some guys. I think um, I think Virginia has some, like there's a bunch of former professional European basketball players that came into college basketball this year, and some of them are doing well, some of them are not. But um, with him being technically classified as a European player, he was granted eligibility. And I don't know if you guys remember, right when that ruling came down, Preston Murphy tweeted out a video of him basically reacting to this news. And then I think he had like it was like a Monstars thing where, he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go get the Monstars and is taking a flight overseas. And for anyone that doesn't know, that was an indication that Alabama was going to go try to get Charles Bediako. I think a lot of people in the Alabama basketball community and on Twitter and all of these things like kind of hinted at that, but like that's what Alabama was going to do. Charles Bediako got denied from the NCAA eligibility one time, already because he had signed 3 NBA contracts, including Exhibit 10, and then two two-way contracts, one I think with the Spurs, and then another one with the Pistons, I believe. Um, but got denied, but never played in the NBA. And essentially, what's going on now is there's a temporary restraining order basically blocking the NCAA from enforcing their rules. And then there's a hearing on Tuesday, um, so that Alabama, or not Alabama, but Charles Bediako is hoping to get an injunction from a judge, ruling that he is eligible to play. Um, and I mean, technically, he could play Saturday. Um, I assume there's probably some confidence in the building that he will play Saturday. Remain skeptical, just from a sense because just looking at the like temporary restraining order and all of the language, there's not necessarily offsetting language in the temporary restraining order that says Alabama won't be punished once the temporary restraining order is lifted if Charles Bediako's injunction isn't granted. So if he's ruled ineligible, there is a potential, and maybe they've sorted it through compliance where there's not an issue with this. Maybe that's why there's confidence. But there could be a potential legal issue where Alabama could be punished post temporary restraining order, um, meaning that they could not be selected for the NCAA tournament. They could have vacated wins. And is that worth the headache to go through the legal loop or the legal hula hoops or like rings, whatever, legal, steps to fight this when it's going to probably take longer than to get through the NCAA tournament to anyway. So that's kind of where we're at, right? Like, will he play? Won't he play? We'll talk about our opinions, but I just wanted to give like an overview for everyone listening as kind of like that's what's on the table right now is Charles Bediako has a temporary restraining order. He technically can play for Alabama on Saturday. Does Alabama face consequences after the temporary restraining order if he's ruled ineligible? Who knows? And then there's a injunction hearing on Tuesday before Alabama plays Missouri to determine whether or not he could technically be ruled eligible. So I've done enough talking. Since we started with Joey with the breakdowns, let's get Michael's opinion to begin with on just kind of this landscape, your thoughts on the Charles Bediako situation, and then college basketball as a whole, maybe college athletics as a whole.
So being a high school coach, I'm always going to take the side of the high school athlete, right? And I know the NCAA, like, and I know Charlie Baker tried to, in his statement this morning or last night, talked about the fact that this was taking away opportunities from high school athletes. And I'm never about taking away opportunities for high school athletes. For those of you that don't know, I'm a high school football coach. I used to be a high school basketball coach as well. And so one of our jobs as a high school coach is to try to get our players recruited. And it's been very difficult right now to get even our really good players recruited because of the transfer portal. And so that's number one that's taken away from high school athletes. So that wasn't a concern. Back in 2020, 2021, when the NCAA granted an extra year of eligibility for COVID year, when they decided that the JUCO ruling, which I believe that was a court hearing or whatever that they just gave into, but that wasn't a concern for the high school athlete. When it was ruled that Najee could go to Baylor, that wasn't a concern for the high school athlete. So why is now all of a sudden that a player wants to come to Alabama? Why is that a concern when he's not even taking an opportunity from a high school athlete because a high school athlete's not able to come to the team at this part of the season. So all he's doing is trying to finish out his eligibility. And maybe they're thinking they don't want to open a Pandora's box, but they opened Pandora's box at the beginning of the summer when they allowed professional players from Europe to come over here. Like, and that's another aspect. What are you defining as professional? So why is the G League, and I understand you signed an NBA contract, but you never played in a game. Well, what is the difference in playing in the G League and playing professional ball in Europe? So that's just my thought on the on the whole scenario. Is I'm always going to advocate for the high school player, but don't use that saying when it's just to your advantage. In which in this case, your argument doesn't really make sense. Okay. So because he's not taking another opportunity away. And also, why would Oates not take advantage of this potential opportunity? You talk about, that I see fans on X today and on other social media that, are blaming Oates or blaming Bediako for doing this. If other schools are allowed to do it, why would you not potentially take advantage of this? We talked about this before, and then I'll stop talking. This is my last point, and I'll stop talking. But you're in a time of college athletics, where you have to adapt, or your program's not going to be able to sustain. Okay. So we talked about this earlier back in, and since we like to use football examples, I'll use a football example from 2013 when Nick Saban was talking about the hurry up, no huddle offenses. And he even proposed a rule that you could not snap the ball until a certain amount of time had come off the play clock. Well, that didn't pass. So what did he do? A year later, he hired Lane Kiffin. Alabama started running hurry up, no huddle, and they started becoming prolific offenses every year. So if the best coach in the history of sports, potentially, arguably the best coach in the history of sports, can use rules to his advantage, why wouldn't any coach use that to their advantage? So I don't blame Nate Oates one bit for trying to do this. It helps his team. His job is to try to get the university to compete for championships. And you can argue all you want to about whether Charles Bediako should or shouldn't be. You cannot argue that this does not make an immediate impact on Alabama's basketball team this year. He makes an immediate impact. It's an area of concern that Alabama's had all year long after Aiden Sherrill. So this makes Alabama, in my opinion, an immediate second weekend team, potentially a third weekend team, and a potential SEC championship team.
Well, and before Joey and Charles go, I will say this. I think your point about making it beneficial for high school athletes and giving them better opportunities, if that were the case, Tyron Grant Foster wouldn't have been ruled eligible. Puff Johnson wouldn't have been ruled eligible. I think his name's London Johnson for Louisville. Wouldn't have been given years of eligibility after playing in the G League. The true distinction for Charles Bediako is that he signed NBA contracts. Well, he's never played a minute in the NBA. And then to say what is the distinction between the NBA and any other professional basketball league, right? Like for the NCAA, if you're going to die on that hill, it's a hill you're going to lose because a judge isn't going to say, oh, you can only, because it's the NBA, oh, you can't be eligible there. But for any other professional basketball league throughout the world, however many basketball leagues there are, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of professional basketball leagues. You can be eligible, but if you go to the NBA and play 1 minute, you're not eligible. It's just not going to hold up in a court of law because there's a lot of issues with that. Like, why wouldn't they be eligible? Because that's still professional basketball, and you're letting other professional basketball players. That's Charles Bediako's entire point. Is you're letting all of these professional basketball players play. Why can't I play? I still have eligibility left. So, again, if it were about preserving and giving high school athletes the most opportunities to play, they wouldn't be letting professional athletes play in this. They wouldn't be giving eligibility, 6-7 years eligibilities to guys that don't deserve it. Trinidad Chambliss is getting an injunction hearing, and there's an expectation that he's going to be granted an additional year, even though he's already played 5 years of college football. Like, if it's about college athletes and high school athletes getting opportunities, then don't bring out these other countless examples of them not doing that. So I'm sorry, get off my soapbox on that. Joey, Charles.
If it's about caring about high school athletes, then the NCAA had better not approve the potential rule change for red shirts for football. Which, for those out there that don't know, the coaches approved a plan to allow players to play up to 9 games a season before not being redshirt eligible. So if we're talking about potentially hurting high school athletes and their chances, that's going to cause all sorts of problems if they approve that. Look, we college athletics. It's a duh statement. Has dramatically, the landscape has shifted so much in the past 6-7 years going on. Dadgum, I do that every freaking episode now, don't but with all those changes, they've all started from a good place. There's no foresight. I think with the NCAA and the leadership that they've had, they don't think things through. They don't think, as Michael just said, they don't think about opening Pandora's box until that box has already been opened. We have to look at just all the issues they've had lately. Right now we have Duke suing its own flipping quarterback because of potential issues there, and trying to steer back to basketball instead of football. Using the high school athletes is nothing more than an excuse. We have seen time and time again over the past 5, 6, 7 years that the NCAA doesn't care about high school athletes. They care about the product that they offer, and they care about how much money they can make. That's really all they care about. If they cared about the actual high school athletes, they wouldn't have made half of the changes that they have made over these few years. Now, addressing Bediako specifically, or more so Nate Oates, I completely agree with Michael. I think Oates would be dumb not to take advantage of this. And we've seen, I think it's a much smaller example, but we've seen Oates kind of already do this year when talking about appealing calls, right? There's a certain point where you have to kind of take advantage of the rule to just how absurd it is. With how many, I forget which game it was. It might have been the Mississippi State game, where even though Bama was trouncing them, you had both teams making appeals with 5 minutes left in the game, even though it was pretty much already decided at that point who was going to win, and that extended that game. I think that game went 3 hours. It was a really long game. It was at least 2.5 hours, 2:45. So you really you kind of have to take advantage of the rule to show how absurd it is, and maybe that's the end game here. I personally, I'm still have my own doubts whether Bediako will play. Obviously, it depends on the ruling, but particularly this weekend. But when there's the expression, when push comes to shove. Well, the players, the coaches, the schools, they've all been pushing. They've all been shoving at this point for the past several years, trying to get things changed. And if things don't, if things remain unchanged, why not take advantage of the rules that are out there? I know people will say that with Bediako, there are still rules being violated. The NCAA will certainly say that, but you can't make those claims when you have exceptions that are already out there. But the NCAA has been doing this for a long time. We have to think of Javon Quinterly back when he transferred from Arizona to Alabama, right? And Alabama fought, but he was ultimately ruled ineligible, even though that exact same year you had several players that also transferred that were ruled eligible. The NCAA has been making these, kind of pick and choose choices for far longer than since when the transfer portal and NIL had come around. So I don't expect anything different. I know I'm seeing things through crimson tinted glasses a little bit, but I'm trying to take this viewpoint from a much larger scope of, I think, what was it the other day? When I was on Twitter, somebody jokingly tweeted, they whispered that the NFL had a better product than college football, right? 5 years ago, I would have thought you were out of your mind if you had told me that. But now I kind of find myself believing that, because not only do you have much more competitive games, but you don't have, at least in the pros, you have every year, you'll at least maintain at least 60, 70, 80% of your roster year in and year out. With college, it doesn't matter how loyal a player is or how big of a fan they are of a team. They could go. Somebody like Ryan Williams, for example, first off, kudos to him for staying in Alabama for as long as he has. But you just never know what these players are hearing from, who they're being tampered by. And so anyways, and that's it. That just all goes back to high school athletes again. If you really care about high school athletes, you're not going to allow those types of things to happen. So I'll get off of my soapbox. We could talk in circles about this all night, but I'll let Charles go because I'm sure he has a lot to say.
I'll also start with Nate Oates because I think y'all both are correct. Nate Oates has a responsibility to his employer, the University of Alabama, to put a good product on the floor to compete for national championships. And if there's going to be an opening in this rule that you can exploit to bring a player back like Charles Bediako, who has been part of the Alabama system. It's not like you're just out there recruiting generically in the G League or anything like that. This is a guy that's targeted because he was at Alabama previously. So, in all that, Nate Oates also has a responsibility to us, the fans, to be able to put the best product on the floor and to go and win games as well. And we keep talking about the NIL era, we talk about collectives and all the different things. I think we've talked about too at times that fans, not just Alabama fans, but fans across the country are getting nickeled and dimed while ticket prices continue to skyrocket and other things that didn't used to be that way. Uh, Nate Oates has a responsibility to us to as fans to make sure that Alabama is competing for national championships. And if this gives him an opportunity to strengthen that case this season, then I have no problem with him taking advantage of it. And just the same way that I'm saying that, Baylor's coach Drew has the same responsibility to his base, just like Coach Kelsey at Louisville has the same responsibility to his fan base. So, in my opinion, you can't fault the players and you can't fault the coaches. The person who, or the organization that needs to be at fault is the NCAA. And Charlie Baker's name is going to get thrown out a lot because he is the president of the NCAA right now. I wouldn't point the finger at him. I point the finger at Mark Emmert and Miles Brand back in the day. Charlie Baker has taken over a situation that was, I think he's been president now for 2, maybe 3 years. He was thrust into a really bad situation, and he's trying to put out, as much fires as he can. So I don't really have any problem with him. I have a problem with Mark Emmert, who for years wanted to continue to push back that they're not employees, they're student athletes. I thought it was really funny. Y'all probably caught it this week too. I am going back to football, but for the national championship game, Carson Beck made the comment at press day that he hadn't been to classes in 2 years. I was rewatching Last Chance U on Netflix, and you remember the big part of that show was guys having to qualify to get into these schools. Have y'all heard any player ever have an issue of trying to qualify? I'm sure it's out there, but it's never really talked about in my opinion anymore of, well, this guy's going to have to go the JUCO route to get his grades up. Or this guy's going to have to stay, at JUCO, or he's going to have to take summer school to be able to qualify to play at this university or this college. That never comes up anymore. But going back to Mark Emmert and going back to Miles Brand, under his tenure, made the comment that these powerhouse schools, this arms race when everybody was building these great stadiums and these great facilities and all that, they knew the money was there to do it. And yet we've had case studies going so far. I'm going to start with the Pony Excess back at SMU. I know it goes back further than then. Alabama's been tagged, Auburn's been tagged, of course, Miami's been tagged. I mean, you can't be an NCAA member institution without being tagged for probably providing some improper benefits to some athlete for some sport at some point. But all this has been going on. And I'm not saying that the NCAA should have, because all that was going on, the NCAA should have made a rule that it's now okay. But you knew this was happening, and you sitting there basically with your pants caught down on this whole NIL stuff. There are no rules, there are no regulations. I know people keep talking about that it's ruining the game of college basketball. I still turn on the TV and watch college basketball. Like, I'm not boycotting college basketball. I'm not boycotting Baylor or Louisville or Illinois. I didn't boycott Kentucky when Calipari was there, when we knew there were payments being made under the table. Like, I'm still watching the product that's on the floor. But it is at the point now that somebody's got to step up, and either the NCAA's got to get their act together, or what I do think will ultimately happen is these conferences are going to get together and go make their own league, because it seems like the NCAA is really there as a nonprofit to collect the money, distribute it to the universities, and that's about it. Joey, you talking about the Javon Quinterly ruling. I remember that ruling came out 2 or 3 days before the season opener of that 2019-20 season. Why does it have to take that long to make a ruling like that? Do you not have people on staff that can move these things quicker? Which I know they've got a bunch of different cases because they haven't been able to police these institutions all the way back then. So at the end of the day, in my opinion, with this situation, the NCAA is totally at fault. And Charlie Baker doesn't need me to stand up for him. He'll probably stick his foot in his mouth at some point over the next couple of months anyway. But I look at it that this is a Mark Emmert being totally incompetent as NCAA president for over a decade when he got the job, and Miles Brand as well. Miles Brand was there from 2003 to about 2009, 2010, when coaches' salaries were starting to get more in that $1 million range. And so, in my opinion, I even felt when Coach Saban's numbers were starting to get up to 6, 7, 8 million, that just, even though he was creating all this wealth for guys that were going into the NFL, it still felt a little icky to me that you got a guy who's making $8 million on the sidelines with guys who are getting scholarships. I think Greg Byrne has told us in the past that the worth of a scholarship is about $200,000 per year, because it's not just the educational part if you're going to class, but it's the room and board and everything else that goes into it as well. Um, but that, even that $200,000 just didn't seem like it really equated to what these coaches were making on the sidelines, and the coordinators and the assistant coaches and all that goes into it. So I'd love to see Charles back on the floor. I hope it happens on one of these home games, because I think it would be a raucous ovation for him. At least I hope it would. And yeah, as an Alabama fan who wants to see us win a national championship, you get to plug him coming off the bench behind Aiden Sherrill, who has been playing phenomenal the past couple of weeks, but we know is playing in short bursts, because that's what benefits him the best, and he's still having to play through injury. I'd love to see Charles Bediako back on this team in an Alabama jersey, which I did also wanted to check just to see if he'd been added to the roster yet on RollTide.com. As of right now, he has not been added, but I also do know that the number 10 and the number 14 are available for whenever he does want to come back.
Well,
I checked.
Keaton
I
Bristow
checked
is
that.
wearing 10.
I checked that roster 10 minutes before we recorded.
Isn't
14 is
Keaton?
available, 10 is not.
Yeah, Keaton Bristow is wearing 10.
Why is Keaton Bristow not on the roster? Anyway.
Well, now you just opened up a whole nother can of worms. Oh no, we need to go and check that out. I will say this from like you said, from an Alabama perspective, like Alabama's only doing, and Nate Oates is only doing what they feel like is being allowed in the NCAA, like in the this era of the NCAA, right? Like you've given all of these guys additional years. You're allowing, I mean, there's reports of Kentucky's roster being worth over $20 million. There's college football rosters that are reaching $40 million. You're, bringing in former professional athletes into all of this, and if the NCAA's entire goal is to make sure student athletes have an education and are willing to are allowed to get their degree, then why would Charles Bediako be ruled ineligible? Me personally, I think all of it, especially the professional aspect of it, is detrimental to college basketball as a whole. The moment that you introduce any professional athlete into an amateur sport that is supposed to be an amateur sport, you ruin the integrity of the game, and you actually limit the opportunities that a like we said, a high school athlete has, right? Like there's a trickle down effect where, and you actually see this in college gymnastics quite frequently. I don't know how many people are very familiar with how the recruiting process in college gymnastics, but my sister-in-law was a gymnast for University of Denver. Went through the recruiting process, was being recruited by Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Auburn. I don't think she got recruited by LSU, but that's not the point. The point is I got to see an inside look at this. So the way that college gymnastics recruiting goes is if your year is an Olympic year, so my sister-in-law's recruiting year was an Olympic year, any high school or non-elite level gymnast is immediately put below the elite level or Olympic gymnast, because the expectation is that any elite gymnast or Olympic gymnast is going to be inherently more talented than what they call a level 10 gymnast or someone that doesn't go to the Olympics. What ends up happening is if a college gymnast goes, this is before NIL, if a college gymnast goes to the Olympic trials, doesn't make an Olympic team, they could then go to college without losing their eligibility. Now you can go to the Olympics and still come to college, but what ended up happening is my sister-in-law actually skipped a grade so that she was in the recruiting class before the Olympics because colleges were not recruiting her because they wanted to recruit Olympic level gymnasts before they recruited people that were not Olympic level gymnasts. And that's what's going to happen in a broader scale for college basketball, and it's going to go into college baseball. It's going to go into college football. It's like what's going to end up happening is a practice squad player for the NFL is going to be like, I want to go back to college because I'm not making enough money on the practice squad, and they're going to be able to come back to play college football again as long as they have eligibility. That's what this can of worms is opening by doing this, and it's not an Alabama problem. It's a NCAA problem that has allowed this because of the way the NIL and everything is going to it has been happening. So I know a lot of fans want to blame Alabama for this. Alabama, if I'm going to be completely honest, and what Nate Oates is doing is he's pushing the envelope enough that forces a judge and forces the NCAA to make a ruling and make a stance on something so that potentially this could be a for the betterment of college athletics. People will hate it because it's Alabama. People will hate it because it's Nate Oates and they don't like them and they don't like either of them. But if ultimately Charles Bediako is ruled ineligible and never plays another minute for University of Alabama, but there's an entire ruling, an entire rule set that's being set forth by a judge in a court and by the NCAA, was it really that big of a deal that he got ruled eligible for one game that he may or may not play, right? So I think in the grand scheme of things, this is good for the NCAA and it's good for college athletics potentially. But like Charles said, like Michael said, like Joey said, this has been something that's been brewing in college athletics for well more than 5, 6 years or however long the incident. Like this has been something that has been fighting in courts ever since the what was it? The EA
Ed,
college
Ed,
football.
Ed
Yeah.
O'Bannon,
Ed
the Ed
Yeah.
O'Bannon.
O'Bannon case.
Ever since then, this has been brewing and the lack of regulation that the NCAA has had and the lack of, clear-cut guidelines across the sports in the last decade is the reason why we are here. And hopefully this provides clarity for any future situation.
I don't think not just the lack of regulation, but the lack of just any type of plan of how NIL was going to work. I think the revenue sharing idea is a good idea. And I think it's something that could be very successful. But the other part of NIL, like Christian, you just talked about some of these football rosters that are getting them to $40 million. That's not what NIL was created to be. And of course, the transfer market should not have been created for it to be free agency. And that got all crazy when you didn't require players to have to sit out anymore. And then you could allow graduate transfers and all that. What I think this just shows is just the NCAA's incompetence. And I really believe if this gets ruled in the way for Charles Bediako and for Alabama that he's able to play, I think the NCAA is done for, which honestly I think is a good thing. I think it's time for the conferences or somebody else to put the product together. I think we've talked about before, probably offline or just in general. The college football playoff is not run through the NCAA, and it's got its own issues and things like that as well. But that's not an NCAA product. So there is the opportunity for these things to be run without NCAA involvement. And clearly, they're not out there policing it the right way because nobody knows what's going on. And so I think this just continues, hopefully, to speed up the process that either the NCAA is done for and you get a new organization or somebody else, and not just it's not just Charlie Baker, but you've got multiple people that are working with the NCAA or working on the NCAA to figure out, okay, what are these rules and regulations going to be as it goes to roster management and NIL and some of these other things, so that everybody knows what the rules are and what the level playing field should be.
And to kind of piggyback on what you're saying there, and not to get off on a tangent, but I think one of the issues with that the NCAA has in creating rules, and I know a lot of rules are created by the presidents and by the conferences, and the NCAA just enforces or whatever. But so the issue is when you are sitting down and you are creating rules, you cannot just create rules like everyone's going to be a rule follower. When you create rules, you have to create rules like you are a rule breaker. You have to think like you're a rule breaker and say, if I make this rule, what am I going to try to do to break it, or to not just break it, to find the gray area? Where's the gray area? What am I going to try to find? How can I exploit this rule? That's what you have to do when you create rules. And that's something that I think the NCAA needs to do a better job of when they're, if they even try to set a whole new landscape. Personally, I think this summer there needs to be an entire redo of the entire system. I know it's not going to happen, but something has to change, because college athletics are becoming an afterthought, and it's becoming very frustrating just as a fan to sit and not just watch the product. I'm going to watch the product because I love the sport, right? I love football, I love basketball, I love baseball. And I love Alabama Athletic, and I love the university. So I'm going to watch it for that. But just as far as the following it, getting different subscriptions, getting different, listening to different radio, listening to different podcasts, except Crimson Crossover. Always listen to Crimson Crossover. That may fall by the wayside, because it's becoming, or I should say, it's losing the effect and the stranglehold that it had on people for so long.
If the NCAA as a whole was a professional league, would we already be dealing with a lockout
Yes.
that nobody can get on the same page? So let's lock it down and, bring everybody to the table and try to figure it out, which it would continue to be locked out, I'm sure. But that's what it feels, as we were kind of talking, that's what it feels like it probably would be if the NCAA was a professional league right now, is that it would be in a lockout.
Well, I don't even know if a lockout's even the right word, because lockout
Yeah.
means that there's not an agreement between, the institutions or the conferences or the teams and then the players. You wouldn't even get an agreement between conferences before you could even get to the player issues. Like you look at the college football playoff, like there's talk of expansion, and the Big Ten wants 24 teams, the SEC wants 16 teams, and there's not an agreement there. And so you're kind of at an impasse, and that's kind of where it is. And then you talk about like roster limitations, right? SEC implemented roster limitations for football for 85 scholarships, but I think like the Big Ten and the ACC, there's no roster limitations for 85 scholarships. Like you can just have as many scholarships as you want. Like there's no continuity within Division One sports between conferences, let alone being able to regulate what players are doing, right? And you talk about the clearinghouse for NCAA or the NIL deals. Like, there's no continuity between what is considered to be a valid NIL deal and what is considered to be, a way to circumvent the rev share. And you're seeing that with these rosters of $40 million. Well, essentially what's happening is teams like Texas in football is basically begging the NCAA to do something about the fact that they're spending over whatever the rev share limit is, and they're justifying it as it's marketing dollars. Well, I mean, anything could be marketing, right? Someone could put a tweet out once and get paid $1 million for it. based off of a platform, right? And so, like, what's happening is you're having so much different things happening at one time to where things are getting through the cracks in the NCAA and they can't keep up. And so I think moving forward, the best thing to do is get away from the NCAA. What does the NCAA do as far as our power structure is concerned? Like, the last team to get a sanction was Michigan, and that was because they were blatantly cheating and sign stealing and recording practices and all of this stuff. Before that, when's the last time that someone has, you know, been significantly impacted, you know, from any NCAA ruling outside the FBI investigation for basketball?
Which again, I was actually looking that up. Was an FBI investigation, not an
Yeah.
NCAA investigation, an FBI investigation. Y'all have probably heard the comment, like I've heard the comment that, this can't, from as far as the NIL, it can't continue on like this. The money's going to dry up at some point. And it feels like the NCAA may be trying to play a game of chicken, of just trying to wait out the money drying up. And I don't think the money's going to dry up anytime soon. I don't think it's going to dry up sooner than the NCAA collapsing in on itself. So
Well, it's going to dry up. The money is going to dry up. For teams like Alabama, the money is going to dry up because they don't have the oil, they don't have the Nikes, they don't have, Florida has Gatorade. Like, they don't have Mark Cuban sitting there with $1 billion and willing to, spend it all. And there's not a constant flow of income. But like the money's going to dry up, and you're seeing it in college football right now. Your traditional powerhouse teams are not getting the most talent every year in and year out. And on top of that, they're not keeping the talent that they already have. Teams are getting less depth, more injuries are happening because people are having to play more and all of these things. And you're seeing, while there is parity in athletics, ultimately it's going to come down to who pays the most money for the best players. That's what it's going to, and we found that even the older players, who has more money for the older players in athletics, are going to rise to the top and be those teams that are going to be successful. And that whole argument goes back to what you said, Michael, about creating opportunities for high school students. Indiana just showed you that they could go win with 40 players that were what, like 24 and above, win a national championship. All you need to do is go get 24, 25-year-olds, put them on your team and win. How does that help a high school student?
Right. Well, Rick Pitino said last year that he's not even going to bother recruiting a high school player anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the best basketball coaches ever said that. He said, why would I recruit somebody that's unproven, that has to take time to get stronger, has to take time to adapt to the game, when I can go get somebody that's older, already proven, ready to go, that's ready to go physically. So you're turning into what you're really doing to prospective high school athletes, and which is fine. There's nothing wrong, and I tell this to our players all the time. There's nothing wrong with going to Division II as a high school kid, but you're not, most Division II, Division III schools, you're not getting a full ride, right? And so that's really hurting high school. That's hurting high school athletes just from that aspect. And so, something has to be done. I don't know what's going to be done. But to tie this back all into this situation, I've said before, I hate the direction it's going. I hope Charles Bediako is able to. I hope it happens. I hope it works. I hope number one, because like I said, it turns Alabama basketball into an immediate. I firmly believe it turns Alabama basketball into an immediate Final Four contender. I believe it turns Alabama basketball into an SEC title contender, up there with Florida. I want to see that happen. And number two, I think if this happens, it's going to spur some change that is finally needed, because Alabama is a villain, whether a lot of our fans want to admit it or not. Alabama athletics, Alabama football, Alabama basketball are villains, and everybody around the country wants to see Alabama fail, and if Alabama can exploit this, we need to stop it, right? So that's kind of my thought on the whole thing. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the direction that's going, but I hope it happens.
Absolutely. And I'll say this, the NCAA didn't make a full statement about being vehemently against the whole Baylor thing. They just approved his eligibility and didn't say a single thing. They've come out with two statements in the last day talking about this, about Alabama. So you're absolutely right. Alabama's a villain, but at the same time, a good coach once said, "Is this what you want college athletics to become?" And people thought he was crazy. So,
NCAA has always stood for national corruption against Alabama. So,
all right, let's quickly go to the Tennessee game. I think it's important. I think this is a very big game for Alabama. Outside of the whole, there's going to be this whole cloud and shadow of, will Charles Bediako play? Is it right? Whatever. But more importantly, I think that this is a game that one, Alabama, I think needs to win, and Nate Oates needs to win for maybe a confidence thing. I think Alabama's 0-4 versus Tennessee in their last four matchups. It's at home. It looks like there might be some rough weather. So fingers crossed if there is, first of all, if there is, there's some rough weather. So don't feel like you need to go to the basketball game if you have to, like, sell your tickets, give them away for people that maybe are local to Tuscaloosa. More importantly, I think the university should allow the students to come into the game. If there's going to be ice and things like that, where it's going to prevent people from being able to come in, why not just open it up to the students and make it a student game? I think they did that. When was it?
Missouri 2 years ago.
Yeah, Missouri 2 years ago. Make it a good environment, but more importantly, this is a game that, like I said, Alabama, I think Nate Oates needs to win. I think if you want to stay in the competition for, SEC title race, you need to win this game. And then you need to win this game for maybe some moral victories and some confidence moving forward.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think you starting off with it, losing four straight to Tennessee, and not all four games have been blowouts. Obviously, the game last year, Tennessee wins on a quarter court buzzer beater after we have a 5-second violation underneath our own basket.
Hold on. News literally just came out. Charles is playing on Saturday. That literally like a minute ago.
So what's more? So let's as everybody takes a breath and you think about that, I also want to throw out there, this may be more for Christian and Joey and myself. This is the second time we've broken news on the Crips and Crossover podcast. What's more exciting? Nate Oates coming back to Alabama.
Nate Oates, 100%. Nate Oates, 100%. I was so scared. Yeah, and for those of you who did not watch that podcast, all three of us were sitting there like disappointed and like panicking like internally whether or not Nate Oates was going to leave. And then Joey's like, hold on just a second. Nate Oates is Alabama's, and I was like, oh my God.
The first like 2/3 of that podcast, you'd have thought we had just come from a funeral. Like it was It was so dismal. That last third made it worth it though. And now I'm gonna look at these news.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can edit out the part where I said that I hope it happens, because now we know that it is happening.
No, I'll cut this. We'll leave that in. We'll leave that in because it's a breaking news thing. So obviously, like the podcast, I'm not gonna cut out the podcast just to, but we're good. We're good.
As far as the game, I think this is a chance for obviously Alabama to break a losing streak to a rival, but also get a monkey off of Nate Oates' back that his teams can't beat physical teams. right? That's kind of the nationwide stance on Alabama basketball and Nate Oates basketball, that he can't beat teams that play physical defense or beat teams that have good post play. And not that it's completely inaccurate, but it's a little, the evidence is circumstantial in my opinion. But I really believe this is a chance to break that streak. This is a game. I believe Tennessee's a good basketball team. They're not an elite basketball team, and I don't think their guard play is as good as it has been in the past. And obviously, we know their post play is not as good as it has been in the past. But I believe this is an opportunity that Alabama's going to have to actually be able to get the guards get into the paint, and really make Tennessee choose how they're going to guard our pick and roll. And now, if it depended on how many minutes Charles Bediako plays, we have a real true lob threat in the pick and roll as well that you have to clamp down on. So this is just another aspect of the offense that Tennessee has to guard. And I think this is a good opportunity to kind of get that, get that narrative. It's one step towards getting the narrative changed that Nate Oates teams can't beat a physical basketball team.
Curious to see how big of a if this could potentially be a distraction for the players. Hopefully it's not. Obviously it's going to be a huge focal point for the fans, and it's going to be a huge focal point for the media heading into this game. I'm just wondering how hopefully the team will be able to remain focused, because we just spent the last few minutes talking about Tennessee.
Yeah, Joey, I was worried about the team being, whether or not the team would be focused or not. But I was more worried about that if Charles Bediako did not play. Now that he is playing, I think you're going to see a little more focus and a little bit of energy injected into the team. I mean, we saw Mari Allen's story today on Instagram, right?
Got deleted.
That did get deleted. That is true. But the internet is forever. So,
yes.
I think there's some excitement there from the team. So I would have been worried before. I'm a little less worried now that he is playing. Okay. Just my
I also think that it's going to bring some juice to the fans. I know of quite a few people that are like now trying to go to the game because Charles Bediako is going to be there. And I think it brings a little bit more excitement to the game. I think for the players, they're probably excited to be able to get. I mean, who knows how much Charles Bediako is going to play? I know he's been playing in the G League, and obviously the pace of play is pretty fast in those levels of basketball. But who knows if he's in pure good enough game shape to be able to run in the offense that we're going to be running, and who knows if he's, because Alabama doesn't have the same defensive coordinator as what we had when Chuck was here. I mean, who was it? Not Brian Adams. Why did I just say Brian Adams? Charlie Henry. Charlie Henry was the coach, or the defensive coach, while he was here. Now it's Brian Adams. I don't believe Chuck has been practicing all week. I don't think he's been with the team. I'm pretty sure he's still technically under contract with the Motor City team. And then offensively, Chris Fleming is the offensive coach. And prior to him, who was it? Was Pat dead? Was Pannone the coach?
Pannone, yeah.
I didn't know if it was Pat.
But Oates was still really. It was Pannone. Pannone and Oates kind of worked together on it.
Okay.
Oates is still making the play. You can see Oates is still making the play calls during the game.
Are we sure Pannone was the coordinator when Bediako was here?
Oh, no, when Bediako was there.
Yeah, when Bediako
Sorry,
It was
no,
Pet,
Bediako was
right?
there with Petway. Yes.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Pet. And so I mean it obviously still was Oates, but it was also Pet. So like the offensive scheme might be different, the defensive scheme might be different. So it might not be as easy as a plug and play for Charles Bediako. I would limit anyone's expectations that thinks he's going to start. I think the starting role is specifically for Aiden Shrell, and I think Aiden Shrell has earned that starting spot. Um, I think you probably see Charles Bediako eat up a lot of Noah Williamson's minutes, and whatever potential minutes that Keaton Bristow might have had at the five. I think that's what you're going to see Chuck kind of eat up. I There is an opportunity for Alabama to play Chuck and Aiden Sherrill together. I think Tennessee is one of the few teams that you could do that against. I think Florida is probably another one. I wouldn't expect that to be a normal thing for Alabama if beyond this game, if Charles Bediako is able to play. But what he does bring is rebounding and rim protection. And I know Aiden Sherrill's been a top five rim protector in college basketball this year. You're adding Charles Bediako, who I think was at 1.8 blocks per game while he was at Alabama. And then I think the most important thing is that rebounding for Alabama. So I'm excited to see Chuck. It's a ballsy move for Nate Oates to play him, I think, on Saturday. Compliance must feel pretty good about the temporary restraining order. And maybe it's an indication that they feel good about the injunction on Tuesday as well. But I'm excited to at least see him versus Tennessee, and I will be watching the game. So if we lose, it's my fault. I'm just gonna say I'm not missing the Charles Bediako game because of some superstition. I'm watching the game. If we lose, you can blame me, but feel free.
Well, and
The one thing. Oh, sorry, Charles.
playing Tennessee, it doesn't hurt having another guy with 5 fouls on the bench that you can use because
Absolutely.
as much as I would like for this not to be a ref show, this is going to be a physical game.
Really quick, one thing. I'm here for X's and O's talks. So, you were talking about, Christian, whether it would just be plug and play or a little bit of difference. Just the slight difference that we run right now is we typically always have 5 out. We really haven't sat anyone in the dunker spot, which the dunker spot is under the rim. If you're not sure, it's out of the paint, just underneath just over by the block. It's most basketball fans know the dunker spot. But so in previous years when Bediako was playing, he was in the dunker spot role. He would come up and set he'd be the ball screen setter. So now Aiden Sherrill or Noah Williamson, Keaton Bristow, they're either in a spot in the corner or they're in a spot on the wing and in the slot setting the screen. So there's a little bit of a different, there's a little bit of a difference schematically. Also, something that they added last year, and this was a Ryan Pannone thing, was on Alabama's dribble drive, the big, and we saw Cliff Amore do this a lot, the big became what's called a pressure release, right? And if the drive gets stuck, the big is going to a certain spot on the floor to be an outlet to just get the ball back and then immediately hand it back to the guard. So that's something that I don't know if his team has done that in, with his G League team has done that. It's becoming a trend in basketball to do with your bigs that can't shoot. So it's not something difficult, but that will be an interesting aspect to see if maybe they just default to when Bediako's in the game, they default to, hey, let's go back to our base stuff and just our base pick and roll stuff, or let's try to catch him up to speed quickly.
I mean, Chuck last year in the G League did shoot 66% from the 3-point line. So
What was he, 2 of 3?
yes.
I really hope I do not see a Chuck 3, but
I don't know if he hits
Well,
a
didn't
3.
he go? Wait, no, that was Dante Hall that went 1 of 1. from the three.
If he hits a three though, then we probably will have to build a new arena because Coleman Coliseum, the roof will come in.
Hey, I will say for all of you fans of drop coverage, you might see Alabama run drop coverage.
There will definitely be a multitude of drop coverage one when Charles Bediako's in the game. We did it. That's what we did with him. And that's what most NBA teams are doing. So that's what he's comfortable with right now. So I would be willing to bet that that is what we're going to be running. So,
yeah.
And Michael, you were talking about just as far as the makeup of Tennessee's team. Jacoby Gillespie is a guard, and he's leading the team in scoring at about 18 and a half a game. Tennessee, the past couple of years, they typically had one guy, like Dalton Knecht. Last year, I think it was Chaz Lanier. That was that one guy that went and got points for him. So they've got Gillespie, Nate Ammett, the freshman. People have probably heard a lot about him. He's averaged about 15 per game. And then it's you two get Terry and Estrella that are, around 9, 8 points per game, but they don't have Ziegler and they don't have Bescovy and they don't have Mate. They don't have those guards that were really good defensive guards, but also could bring something on the offensive side. And I do think that is something that you are alluding to that's a lot different from this Tennessee team. They're still big. They're still going to be physical, but maybe Doug as they have in previous years against our guards.
Ooh.
A lot going on in this podcast, man.
is this is this potentially going to set a record for the longest Crimson Crossover podcast?
Probably been an hour and a half.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm new. I'm a new employee, so
It
Yeah,
just feels like it just feels like it's longer just because we were supposed to start recording at 6.
Yeah, and then we had to change. I had to change a tire. Then I had to clean up the dog, stuff and all of that. So, and then I think we spent like 30 minutes talking. So,
What a night.
man, what an exciting and maybe not exciting is the right word. What an interesting time for Alabama basketball right now. So, I think I know people are gonna hate me. When's the game on Saturday?
7:30.
7:30. Perfect. We can have a space after the game. So we can talk about the Charles Bediako stuff. We can talk about, the game, hopefully when we ultimately lose because I'm watching the game. We can talk about how I'm such a jinx, all of these things. But we will 100% have a space Saturday night. So be on the lookout for that. I don't believe Sam has me doing anything because she will be working Saturday night. We are supposed to go out after she gets done working, but that's later in the evening. But other than that, we will have a podcast come out next week. I don't know about your guys' schedules, but with the game being on Tuesday, I think we'll probably need to record on Sunday. So if we can do that so that we can have it up ready to go Monday, and then we will, as long as it's not the 9 o'clock game, I'm just going to put this out there. As long as it's not the 9 o'clock game, any midweek game, if it's not a 9 o'clock game, we'll be doing a space. If it's the earlier games, just because the games are 3 hours, it's midnight my time and I have to work the next day. So that's kind of the expectation. As far as our schedule is concerned, and we will be covering all things Alabama basketball and Charles Bediako, and we are your unofficial official source for all law expertise. So please credit us for any good news or any of the things we get right. If we don't get anything right, we never said it. So that's kind of how I live life. But other than that, be sure to like and subscribe the video, subscribe to the YouTube, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we will see you guys soon. Roll Tide.
Roll
Roll
Tide.
Tide.
Roll Tide.